Hello and welcome to Conversations with Benjamin Boyce and Paul VanderKlay. Paul is a pastor of the Reformed Calvinist denomination residing in Sacramento, California. He's also the founder of the Estuary online community model of forming real connections with real people. That's happening online and offline. In this conversation, we take kind of a relaxed and ponderous view of our mutual work as online content creators, so-called community builders in his case, and whatever the heck I am that starts with C. Oh, no, don't go there. You can find Paul's work via the links below, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Pastor Paul VanderKlay.
Yeah. And my wife is just kind of mystified by the whole thing. So.
You can't quit, though.
Yeah.
You're in the churn right now. Like, you are putting out content after content after content.
Well, that's the easy part. Yeah, it's all the vocational stuff that, the church, what will happen to the church? Can we do conferences here? Will that actually help the church? Will it help estuary? I don't know. So many questions.
Vocational sounds like a technical term in your line of work. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I'm a minister. That's my day job. It's my main job. And they're cutting down a tree right across the street. Wouldn't you know that happens right now? Can you hear the buzzsaw?
A little bit. It's kind of flavor. It's just flavor text.
All right. Yeah, it's because, when I look at what I do online, it's pastoring. Yeah. I continue to do these randos conversations. Some of them appear online because some of them shouldn't. They're just private conversations. People out in the world who either I'm not their pastor and they don't want to talk to their pastor about something, or they've never talked to their pastor, or they don't have a pastor. And so then they come looking for me. And it's a weird situation because it's also sort of a parasocial situation. It's an hour or 2 hours out of their life. Mm-hmm. And I don't see anything that's around it. Whereas in a real pastoral situation, you see a lot more that's around it. So,
yeah.
But at the same time, I see that the community that has arisen affords a lot of the people at least something of what they seem to need. So if I would stop, what would happen with that?
Yeah. Oh, really? So you kind of feel like not indentured, but responsible?
No. Well, yeah, I do feel somewhat responsible, and it isn't that I'd stop making. I mean, a lot of the videos I make, they're just my own therapy. I'm just thinking out loud, trying to get a handle on the world, and that anybody watches them is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you wanted to talk about. So
oh no, let's talk about your torpid point of view. But you made me think about one risk in this line of work, this content creation kind of work, is that one gathers attention to themselves and gathers a voice. And you've studied Jordan Peterson almost like on an academic level, bit by bit by bit, and you've traced his career since probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years now.
Yeah. I found him in early 2017, and then I started making videos like 2017.
Yeah. And he's a particular stunning example of what happens when somebody gets launched into like the media sphere, but not just like old school media. He didn't become a talking head, became content creator, by which I mean he had a direct line for a very long time with his audience, with his YouTube channel, before he got bigger and bigger and bigger and scaled up. Now he doesn't really have that much, like it arcs. that I was invited to, and you were there. There was, in the back of my head, I thought he would be around, but he's not. He's just totally removed from the audience. But he's a particular peak example of that. But there's all these lower level F, G, and M level celebrities, and they get a little bit and they boost up. It goes right to their head, or something happens where they have to transform. And I continually go back to your content, because you make interesting videos, but the way that you handle the subjects, the human beings, is always so humble and so non-judgmental. And you have this way of relating with the human subject that is absent in a lot of people. A lot of people are like discussing ideas or playing like these personality games, and you bring this pastoral consciousness to the work, and I think it's really refreshing. And what happens with some people, even some of my friends, they get an air of importance, like they are trying to save the world, and they forget that they're just doing podcasts, And what happens is that they don't have that pastoral rootedness with their audience, like as a personal relationship. They just kind of see a mob and they become a demagogue in that. And there's this really, this kind of infectiousness, and I don't think it's just ego. The ego magnifies this, but they have this sense of importance that they need to do something with what they're given, and it causes them to act, causes them in a charitable formulation to no longer be immune to their own foolishness. In other words, they kind of become cringe, or worse.
Yeah. Well, you start drinking your own Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. And I think that's help. I think for me, it helps that I'm older. I've failed enough in life. I think failure is a really important thing in life.
I'm still ratcheting that up, but I've had plenty too.
Yeah. I mean, because how seriously can you take yourself if most of what you've done just simply hasn't worked? Mm-hmm. And, I learned early on, I went to the Dominican Republic right out of seminary, and just colliding into a world of need and hurt. And I mean, you go there and you think you're going to actually help somebody and make a difference. And you go there and you realize, first of all, especially when you go overseas, you don't know anything. You can't really speak the language. You have absolutely no understanding what it's like to be the people you're working with. Yeah. And the group of people I was working with faced so many challenges that no matter what I did, they were almost all going to die young and poor and live lives of sometimes great happiness and pleasure, but often a tremendous amount of struggle and pain. And the little ways I tried to improve their lives and improve the performance of their churches, whatever that would mean, or the stability of their churches, was just absolutely ridiculous. And so you get a real lesson in just how small you really are.
Well, what's the point of even trying? Coming into contact directly with suffering and trying to bring some salve to it. Like, what is the...
Well, I think that has to be answered along the lines of what is the point of anything else in life? You can raise children knowing that they will suffer and die. In many ways, if you're going to live, if you're going to lean into this game of life on planet Earth, you have to accept the larger frame of the age of decay, where everything you built will break down. Everyone you give life to, they will grow old and die too. C.S. Lewis said, every love is ended by betrayal or death. And that's the way it is in this world. And so it's that realization. I know for a lot of people, that realization sort of leaves them away from the church. But for me, it keeps me in the church because I think that there's just a plausible understanding that some of what I do won't simply be washed away by the ravages of time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when you think about when you have a baby, that baby is this creature that is going away quickly, and you want the baby to go away quickly. The infant will become a toddler, will become a grade schooler, will become a high schooler, will become a young adult, and so on and so forth. So that tiny little creature that you pour yourself into is disappearing. Now, you even do so with the understanding that you're pouring yourself into them will lead to other potentials. So that's good
Yeah.
enough. I learned way more from the Haitians I worked with than I ever taught them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. You get in contact with suffering, not to transform suffering, but to be transformed.
Yeah.
And then what's the comparison between going to a third world country and getting down and dirty with a church that you'll only be with, I don't know, half a year, 2 years, and being online and experiment? I think there's things that are like what you're doing, but you're establishing a virtual church in a way that I haven't seen done in the particular way that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's not ideological driven. It's
Yeah.
people focused.
Yeah.
And you're using a lot of tools, and that's another thing about the content creator. When they get beyond their britches, they don't have any pastoral counseling. They don't have any, well, let alone PR. They don't even know PR. They kind of stumble through PR, but they also public relations, and then also like what the dynamics of human psychology necessarily are, even if they are a psychologist, which most aren't.
I I have always gone at this with a spirit of play. I try
Yeah.
things and see what happens. And
Hmm.
I never set out to create an online church because I don't think, uh, well, what on earth would that be?
Yeah.
But I have done things and things have emerged. And as long as I imagine that what I'm doing on the whole is making the world better in some way and making people's lives better, then I'll do it. There's always nagging questions about
Yeah.
other things. But the part of the difficulty is if you look at what I call Christian YouTube tends to be about trying to increase a tribe through content creation, which is usually sort of selling and promotion, and then
Hmm.
border policing your tribe. This
Hmm.
person, they're in your tribe, but they're saying things that they shouldn't say, so we're going to fight them. And so that tends to be Christian YouTube. And I don't really think that I think it does some things that are helpful. I think people learn church history and a little bit of history of doctrine, and
Hmm.
they make some connections and some networks develop. But you can't really have a church online because, according to John Calvin, there's three signs of the true church: preaching of the word. Maybe you can do that online. Administration of the sacraments. Can't really do that online.
Hmm.
And church discipline. Can't really do that online. So people
Hmm.
use YouTube just to sort of put out messages and to promote ideas, which is fine. YouTube can do that.
Yeah.
But some of what we sort of stumbled into was we can use this network sort of as a party line. When my grandfather took a church in Wisconsin in the 1930s, they had a party line and 17 people were on the phone, and my grandmother would tell me stories about how everybody had a particular ring, and when everybody knew what the pastor's ring was, and when someone would ring the pastor, everybody wanted to hear because they figured, you know, someone died, someone did something, got in
Oh.
trouble. And so this was sort of party line into the pastor's office. And
Yeah.
so once my grandfather decided to troll the party line, and so he was up late one night and he rang his own number and he just listened, because if you listen real carefully, you'd hear the click, click, click as people were, so he knew how many people were on the line. He just waited until everybody was on. He said, 16, that's all of you. And he hung it up. So what we're sort of doing is using YouTube and StreamYard and Discord servers and Substack to see, you had Grim Grizz on, and I think he's been a pioneer in this. I mean, to be virtually not alone.
Yeah.
And to what degree does that work? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what we're playing with. And so
Yeah.
with my channel too, a lot of the videos I make, I'm alone in this building most of the time. I've, got thoughts, and most of my in real life church, at least before Estuary, I talk about Jordan Peterson to the people in my church.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, don't, yeah. I talk about Jesus, I preach the Bible, I do the pastor things. So I reached out online and had other people to talk to, and that became a something. But what it is, I don't know that we know, but I don't know that we know what the internet is anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No. You don't think we know what the internet is?
No, I don't.
It sounds like a loaded statement of ignorance, so there's probably some ideas.
Well, early on, Jordan Peterson in one of his classroom lectures at University of Toronto, had this spiel, we don't even know what a car is. And it's like, what do you mean don't know what a car is? I've driven cars most of my life. He says, he goes through this whole list of how the car transformed life in North America. And he just started the list. I mean, you could talk a long time about how cars transformed church in North America. Mm-hmm. The internet is at least as disruptive as the automobile. Mm-hmm. And so we just don't really have, sure, we know what it is, but we don't know what it means.
There's different domains of what you do. So there is that connectivity, and it's got a certain flavor because you just let normal people talk. You have a big room in your attention span for people who are just people. And you incubate Christian Baxter, and there's a couple of other younger guys and girls who start getting the itch and start producing their own content, and it kind of mother hen thing, and maybe some of them will push out into bigger things. But there's also the realm in your personal videos. You're going through all these other conversations, so you're interacting with the realm of ideas, but then you have personal relationships with kind of the bigger guys, the pre-established guys, or like the intellects, the power nodes in the conversation. I know you only had Peterson on once, but you interact with Peugeot and VanderKlay and
Verviki. You said VanderKlay, Verviki.
I did, Verviki.
I do interact with VanderKlay, but also with John Verviki.
Yeah. And you guys have relationships in this kind of like a council of elders kind of thing, which is a little bit more like, maybe ambitious is not the right word, but it's got like a higher broadcast rate, and it's a little bit more information rich for a wider audience, because the stuff that's really personal is slower. It's very particular. These people are, I can go through and interview them all, and some people will be much more relatable than other people. But if I talk to Verviki, he's talking about this realm of ideas, so it's got a lot more salience for a lot more people.
Yeah. Yeah, so, my relationship with John and Jonathan happened basically, it's sort of the ground floor dynamic. So Jonathan and Jordan are so tight because they met each other before Jordan was at a certain status, because these status hierarchies bind and blind.
Yeah,
and so
they do.
I was fortunate enough to get in early and develop a relationship with Jonathan and a relationship with John. But also, and you know this because you have exactly the same dynamic with, because I see who's on your channel too, and you have different levels of relationship with these people, but as these people go up certain status hierarchies,
Yeah.
and especially when people sort of make the jump from YouTube as a hobby to YouTube as their main vocation, I mean, things have to change because at that point, there is, and you've seen this too. I think Chris Williamson, who I think has done a great job in building his channel, Alex O'Connor, same way. I mean, sort of the game is get the bigger name. And so you want to sort of ladder up on this status hierarchy.
Yeah.
And, fair enough. That's a fine game to play. There's nothing wrong with it. But I tend to find the higher up people go in a status hierarchy, the more bound they are by that hierarchy, the more careful they have to be about what they say. They have their own personal brand to maintain. And the beautiful thing about talking to people who have nothing to lose is you have a
Yeah.
better chance of hearing them say what they really think.
Yeah.
And the realm of thinkability in the world is so huge that I tend to find those people more interesting than I find many people who have higher status because, in many ways, if Jordan Peterson is on YouTube, the vast majority of what he'll say, he has said before, and I have heard it many times, and it is map territory. But if I talk to someone who I don't know so well, they're going to have perspectives that can really challenge me, that I can
I
think
would,
about.
yeah, from my point of view as an interviewer, talking to somebody who's unknown, like there's more blank canvas. And so there's something that like my curiosity, and I like to ask very basic questions anyways, because we just skip over, like you can hear a word and you're like, wait, there's something behind that word. And most people just throw these words around, pull it out. Somebody who's built an entire, cathedral on that little word will really want to defend that word or define that word, and so you don't get to see what's necessarily under it because you would have to start questioning everything else up and down. I bucket list for me would be interviewing Peterson. I think about interviewing Peterson a lot, and we kind of made overtures that would happen, but I imagine that conversation. I would just want him to be really relaxed and talk with him through silence because he's so active and so concentrated that like I would want to like really broaden things out and find something there. The other one would be Tucker Carlson. I think it'd be really fun. And try to get through, because he's got this personality that I listen to. I'm like, no, that's a personality. Like, who is this guy? But and he code switches between being honest and then playing a game. It would be fun to, but how can you talk to somebody who's
Well, that's
so
exactly it. How
bound?
can you, and one of the things that I've seen with Jordan often, first of all, I just watched some of his conversation with Jacob Howling. Jordan isn't often quite patient enough. Jacob's very clear. Jacob's sort of a long talker. I mean, and
Yeah.
as you well know, some people are like staccato. Some people are,
Yeah.
they talk in pages.
Yeah.
And if you want the payoff from the person, you have to be patient enough to let them land the page. Jordan keeps interrupting, and so then you get this thing that goes like this.
Yeah.
And and doing like at some point, I'm sure Jordan and I will have another online conversation. It could happen. It probably will happen, but I'm not anxious about it. Partly because my expectations for it are very low because I've watched. I mean, his conversation with Louise Perry was just a disaster. Louise is has a lot to offer, and Jordan just kept interrupting her. She could barely get a word in edgewise. He was clearly excited to talk to her, which was fine, but
Yeah.
you have to figure that out. So I don't, there are a lot of other people in the corner who do go after, I want to talk to this person, I want to talk to
Yes.
this person. I do that very seldom. Partly because some of the times that I have done it, I realized that the
Hmm.
conversations were fine, and in every case, the person was lovely and generous, and really showed up for the conversation, which was great. But I realized that what I actually value more than, let's say, getting a big name in my channel is developing longer term relationships with people.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't know, I just see that as something that's much more satisfying.
Yeah. It's more of I mean, if you think of the cross, one way of interpreting the cross that I heard is that the up and down part is the soul and God, and then the left and right part is the world. And so you can there is the hierarchy thing, but there's also a way of building out, making more of a dome than a spire, I guess.
Well, and I also what gives me real pleasure. So Grim Grizz was just streaming, and I go over,
Hmm.
and
Pleasure.
it's full of branding. It's all inside jokes.
Yeah.
It's if you're not sort of in, it's like a lot of churches, in fact. If you're not sort of in, you're not going to have any understanding what's going on. You're not going to get the jokes. But
Yeah.
those who are in it and happily so
Yeah.
and enjoying each other. And when I see that, and if I've had a hand in helping that happen, that to me is is why I do this, because I
Hmm.
can see that people have friends and people have people that they can be with. And like I said, doing these randos conversations, especially the ones that aren't
What
recorded.
is a randos conversation for the part of my
So
audience who doesn't
so
follow
when
you?
I started making videos, I had no idea what YouTube was, and I was doing the Freddie and Paul show, which is something
Yeah.
you can find on my channel. And I didn't have anybody to talk to Jordan Peterson about. So he was on YouTube. I thought, I'll make a video. It was a terrible video. Made another one. And I started getting emails from people.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me? Sure, we can talk. And then we just had conversations over Zoom or Skype or whatever. And then people would ask me, what did you say when I asked you this? I don't remember what I said. So then on Zoom, I could record it. So then I'd record it and I'd send them the recording.
Yeah.
And then the thought occurred to him. Then I'd start having to answer the same question over and over again. And then I was like, boy, if I could just put this up on my channel, maybe a bunch of them would get the answer that I have without me having to do it 5 hours, 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
And once I posted it on YouTube, lights went on in people's minds. And they said, oh, I can not only talk to him, but I can talk to him in front of other people. It's sort of like my grandfather's party line.
Yeah.
And then one person who was sort of swept up in this, Cassidy, she says, you talk to any rando on the internet. And so very quickly, this group of people who have no status on the internet became known as randos, and that became a verb. If you
Yeah.
rando somebody, you basically have this conversation. I usually begin with, tell me a little bit about yourself, or tell me about the home you grew up in. And then I sort of use a pastoral sensibility to sort of pull out their story from them, hopefully in a
Hmm.
way that the story can get between us and they can see some things in
Yeah.
themselves. And then other people can see things in themselves. Now, most people won't watch a video with some random person telling their life story, but a few hundred people will,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
didn't know before.
Yeah.
And of course, part of it is it isn't quite as easy as it looks, but very quickly people in the corner started doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And once people began sharing themselves, they once you sort of with a little bit of caution, open up yourself and become a little bit vulnerable to another person over there, and they do the same. Now you've got the beginnings of a relationship.
Hmm.
And then you can bring someone else into the relationship. And that has basically been what happened. So part of my channel is just me thinking through crap in my head, but the part that I most value about the channel is the relationships between the people. Because very quickly, and again, this is strictly from church work. If you have a house church of 10 people, you can have a nice little group in there. Once you get to 50 or 100 people, you cannot take care of everybody's needs.
Yeah.
People in the congregation have to take care of each other's needs. And there are other
Yeah.
people in the congregation who are better equipped to take care of other people's needs than I, as the pastor, am. I have a role to play, but what a church is a network of relationships. And so that in that way, the corner is like a church, and
Yeah.
that it is a network of relationships. And I, like a pastor, do keep throwing ideas in there for people to
Yeah.
sort of chew on and work
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But the main thing are the relationships.
Yeah. And it kind of has a built-in firewall just with attention because, like you're saying, with Griswold Grimm's channel, it's so insulated from getting too big because it's so particular and because everybody kind of knows everybody and there's all those inside jokes. So there is a way, and he probably definitely learned that being online and understanding, you go down these rabbit holes and you find these little communities and then you can tell. And I like finding little communities and busting out because they do have these little languages and stuff like that. Like the dissident right has this, they kind of pepper, or they're not allergic to racism, like these really bad things that you're not supposed to say, and they'll say them and it scares people away so they can keep on going and having their conversation. And some of it's real and other parts of it isn't real. But then if it starts breaking out, then they have to grow beyond that firewall. Like once they get platformed, then all that stuff sticks to them. And then all the ideas that were actually being worked on get brought down to like, okay, well, you're a Holocaust denier, when it's like, actually, no. We're a little bit more flippant with this language than you are. That's one example. And then the detransitioner body of work that I did, they were already talking to each other online through Reddit threads, but when I started to platform them, they matured a little bit more, and then they could see each other talking to each other. And then all these psychologists and stuff who were really worried about gender, I would interview them. They're like, oh, I have a voice. I can break out of like because they were all sequestered by their professional organizations. And then something happened where the right people got together and then they started building all these organizations because they started connecting. You're like, whoa, I got to do that. How do I do
really
that
cool.
again?
And it's really fun to be a part of, isn't it?
Yeah, right. You know?
And you're the son of a pastor, so there's some of that in you too.
Yeah.
You watched. I mean, you were, as a kid growing up, and I was too. You watch that happen. You don't know it's happening. You can't articulate it, but there's something really exciting when people can begin to connect, and healing comes because of their connection.
Yeah, yeah. I think, that was the question sometimes I wrestle with the detransitioner stuff. You talk to somebody who's literally mutilated by their authority figures, and they're in a different stage of, healing from that. Trauma's overused, but they're definitely traumatized. And you're like, should I publish this? I just interviewed a kid. I guess he's 30 now, but he's such a child. Sorry if he's watching this, but he's very young, and he spent 15 years doing OnlyFans as kind of like a pseudo trans person. Like he never did the surgeries, but like that's where he was like a femboy thing. And he did that for years and years and years. And he was getting tons and tons of money from doing that. And but he could never connect with the woman. He could never connect with anybody. And he finally found this woman who he connected with, and, spoiler alert, but their relationship began to transform him, and then she died. And it was just like 3 months ago she died, and I just interviewed her. I have to publish it because, he wants me to publish it, but he's so broken. And you're like, what's the difference between a confession and a testimony? What's my responsibility between? And if you think about it, there's this exploitation aspect in my work, just like him masturbating on camera. Pardon me for bringing that up. He's now doing it with his heart. He's doing it with his soul. He's exposing himself. And there's some sort of development that was arrested in him by prostituting himself, where he doesn't have a sense of interiority, where all the most personal parts of himself he can't see unless they're completely exposed to like a vast number of people. And I think that it's important to show that because that's what so many people are experiencing now, growing up on the internet and not knowing what it is, and us not knowing what it is either.
Yeah, that is so true. And I feel the same way sometimes. Like again, about 50% of my randos conversations go online. Some of them stay private, some of them are not recorded at all. Some of them ask me to delete the recording, which I happily do.
Yeah.
But
Same.
there is that element of when someone confesses their sins on Zoom, and it's on my channel. And people support me because I facilitate this. And I wrestle with that same thing too. I mean, to what degree it's all bound up in there. But at the same time, when I begin the conversation with them, my first question is, do you want to record this or not? And, some of like, yeah. And others are like, well, I don't know. I said, well, let's talk about that because first of all, if we are recording it and you think about the possibility that someone else might see that, even if it doesn't go to the channel,
Yeah.
but maybe someone else in your life might see that, that's going to change what you say to me. Yeah. So if there's a bunch of things, maybe it's best that we not record it at all. So there's no record of this, but it's just you and I talking. And those, of course, are the best conversations almost always.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the definition of intimacy.
Yeah. 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 I know it changes me. I know when the recording light's on, I used to do live streams and I've stopped. I need to do them again, but I would always, I made it a habit to do them even though I didn't want to. And what would happen was I'm like, well, I have to do it. I'm like, I have nothing to say. I have nothing. But then that light goes on. I feel the quickening happen. And then 2 hours go by and like, I don't know what I said, but it's like all of a sudden, like there's all this activity going on. And I see certain parts of certain friendships don't really happen unless I record them. Like, I have relationships that were based around that I don't know how to just call up somebody that I've had 50 hours of conversations with because I'm like, what's the point? But then like the recording comes on and that relationship's there and bound up. It's kind of weird. And I know that that's not, it's not something I'm necessarily proud of or happy with. It's just an odd quirk of my own attention,
I think it's totally natural.
Yeah.
I mean, because in many ways, that's how you are in real life. If you're sitting around in a circle of 4 or 5 people, in some ways, the conversation pauses. That's like the light going on, and then you just talk. And so I'm not surprised by any of what you've said. I mean, part of the real development that happened in the corners, we were doing a lot of this on Discord, which was sort of behind. And then one of the guys, Jacob Federecci, is like, he comes to me, he lives in Southern California, he comes up to Sacramento, super interesting guy, and says, what we're going to do is we're going to have like Trinity Broadcast Network. That's what we're going to be. We're going to have streaming 24/7 on the internet. And I'm looking, I'm like, you like Paul Crouch and blue hair and, gold. This is your plan. But he sort of started it when he started using StreamYard, because the Discord server was a filter, which again, that boundary afforded a degree of intimacy, but the Discord server was also very chaotic. And then StreamYard came along. You have different boundaries because many people, for very sane reasons, will not show their face or put their voice out on an open live stream. So
yeah. Can I just celebrate something with you that just happened now?
Absolutely.
My reeler got back. We got inspected and we had some issues, and then we're like, would you fix these things? She came back. She's like, I'm not going to do this, that, or the other thing, but I'll do this and this. And we're like, well, no, you got to do this, that, and that. And she's agreed.
All right. Well, congratulations.
Get an extra week or 2 to close since it took a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And we're fine with that because it's all the way across the state.
Oh, really?
It's in
Oh,
Spokane.
wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're north of
wow.
Seattle now, so
Wow,
it's a big
Spokane.
shakeup. Yeah. A lot
You're
more
you're
affordable than here.
that is a different state in Spokane than
Yeah.
Olympia.
Yeah.
It's a very different place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we went and visited, and I wasn't sold on it, but I was just trying to be, because Leslie, my wife, was really wanting, she really just wants to get to the next stage in life, and we've been
Yeah.
renting, and it's just like she just doesn't feel like she belongs anywhere. And
Yeah.
when I went to, after ARCS, I went to Swindon to hang out with the Lotus Eater Bros, Carl Benjamin's crew. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
him. And I went to this little town that had been kind of partially ceded to Pakistani migrants, and they just didn't care about it at all. It was just covered in trash, and you had all these old buildings that were, every corner was like crumbling in the whole thing. And it was just this terrible feeling. I'm like, why? You guys came here, or you were brought here, but you don't care about here. It's not like your home. And I told that to Leslie, and since then she's like, yeah, I don't care about this place. That I can't. She wants to garden. It's so important to her to be rooted, and she can't do that because like we might move, and like there's like little things to do at the house, but she's like, we don't want. So she really, really wants to move, and I'm like, I've never owned a house. I have no idea what this is. Can we just have another year? She's like, you said that last year. We had like this little tense thing. I'm like, okay, well, we went to Spokane. I just got quiet and just observe, not make any, just feel like, oh, I felt kind of weird. Felt kind of this. And then we walked into this one house. Sorry, I'm telling you this. This is really stupid and personal. It's actually kind of part
This is exactly what happens all the time. Keep going,
kind of
Benjamin.
what it is. Yeah. We walked into the first house, and I'm like, we could make this work, but we're going to be right. We have she's got two kids. I guess I've adopted them now because I'm a stepdad. We'd be right on top of each other. I'm like, no. And then we walked into the second house, and I was like, this is possible? Like, I could actually have a house and think about having a house, and like it all fits. And there's little quirkinesses to it, but I'm like, oh, this is what she's talking about, having a home. And then I started thinking and doing all the paperwork. I'm like, oh, instead of like spending money on frivolous things, I'll be spending my extra income and my extra energy on the house. I'll start developing a relationship with the place. I've only ever rented. My parents have owned houses. My parents moved us around a whole lot until they finally bought a house, and then they moved us around a whole lot until they finally stopped moving. So it's just this totally different thing. It's kind of like what people say about having a kid, when it changes you, like it just orients you to property in a way that I hadn't been oriented. Mm-hmm. Too. So it's really interesting. And now we have like this like loan application process, and they're really poking through all my stuff, and it's like making me really anxious, even though like I'm pre-approved, so I don't know what, but it's just weird. It's just like the eye of Sauron like bearing down on me. But
Hang on a second. Freddie, I'm talking to somebody. Okay, Freddie says, what's up?
What's up, Freddie?
Have a music practice on Thursday, so Thursdays I'm not alone in the building. Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Well, you've been through. I don't know how you're going to edit this whole thing because
I'm not. I don't want to. I'm just going to cut in, cut out.
You can cut out my stuff about my taxes.
Oh yeah, well I'll do after the taxes.
But. I mean, that gets into something you've obviously covered quite a bit, the whole male-female thing. And I mean, your life has been through huge changes. I mean, a wife changes a man.
Yeah. 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 I had kind of a wife, but we didn't make that bond. Yeah. And so we kind of just, the relationship got stuck for a long time. And she's still not my wife. Like, you can't know somebody for 20 years, And so, like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, that's really personal. That's really personal stuff. But, having this relationship with people online where I'm like, I'm the one where people are kind of the personal thing. And then, like, understanding how to hold people, and also how to hold people in front of other people, like how to manage that stage and stay out of the way, but also look for that line, where the conversation like like it goes down there. It's like, okay, now we're here. And so part of the reason I do so little editing, I don't do that thing where some podcasters will put like the most interesting bit at the front, and then you go back into the conversation. I'm like, no, I want to force people to listen until that point. And we do these things knowing that if you do it another way, you'll get better views, and all the things that happens with that. Better money, more status. And, I kind of balked at status. I balked at that, but at the same time, I kind of I kind of thwart myself. Leslie tells me, you kind of don't want success. Why don't you want success? I'm like, well, I'm really scared of success, but also I'm terrified of success. I want to just get by. I want that limelight. I see what it does to people. And then you have to stop caring about criticism.
Yes.
And then what does that do to you when you stop caring? You
Yes.
lose your lodestar. You lose your conscience because it blares at you. And because that's why I ended up quitting gender, is because the freaking feminists periodically would get really angry at me for a word or something, or a statement that didn't jive with them. And they would dogpile on me, and I could feel it through the phone for 2 or 3 days. I could just feel their energy, like just their wrath. I'm like, this is not, and I can't separate. I can't divorce myself from that part of myself that feels things. I could build kind of a shell, but I have to keep that part of me alive, because that sensitivity mechanism is also how I do what I do. And so far as I achieve that, it's through sensitivity. It's through a very fine sense of shame and guilt, in a way, and conscience.
No, I and that is this, again, this is so connected to all of my experience with church.
Yes.
And religion, because again, religious communities like none other will focus on a word and won't let that word go, and they'll dogpile. And this is exactly why a lot of people are like, I don't want to be anywhere near that dynamic.
Yeah.
But that dynamic is less avoidable than people imagine. You're going to, once you have a community, that community has gathered around a certain spirit, and that certain spirit will instantiate in certain words.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those dynamics will come.
Yeah.
And, once you get above a certain level of that community or a layer of that community, and even in this weird low friction parasocial space, same things will happen.
Yeah.
And again, we're just at the beginning of all of this. I mean, we haven't even had time to figure out what radio and television mean, never mind this.
Yeah, I think Obama was the first Facebook president, and Trump was the first Twitter president, in a way.
Yeah. What's a TikTok president going to look like?
JD might be able to speak to that. I mean, JD Vance, there's something about him, the way that millions upon millions of memes, how memeable he is. And he doesn't have the same level of meme mastery as Trump. Trump, every photo of him, it looks like it was staged, or it's this is a history book. Even him stepping out of a Tesla, you're that looks like it's in a history book, and it just happened 30 minutes ago. But Vance, just his face and all the contortions, and it's okay. And it was really interesting how the Atlantic, his enemies, everybody's making, they didn't understand the level of adoration that was expressed by making fun of him so thoroughly. And so that kind of 4chan, I don't know what it is. like the old guard doesn't even see it, and I kind of have to listen to. I can still see it because I'm still young enough to know it, or like I'm open enough to know it, and I know like I want to be able to be salient for as long as possible in order to engage and to make sense out of the world in that way. But you see the old guard just being completely like, we don't even know what's happening. We don't even know what's happening. And now with Trump 2.0, they tried to take him out in every single way. And all they did was they locked him out of 2020, and they should have let him run because he would have been completely unable to do. And they locked him out, and then they persecuted him, and they persecuted his followers. And now he's going to town in a way that's completely changing what is the field of possibility of politics. Is like, wow, like we are in another realm. And I think that speaks. I think that there's something that speaks, that's echoing to our media environment, to the possibilities inherent in every single one of us. If we're able to connect in the way, there's something that's being shown through that leader, through that man, that's beyond just who he is. In a way, and just like Jordan Peterson was showing us something, and it was really, and he went mythic, and reality treated him like Prometheus and drug him like Noah, like biblical. Like he went through fire. He literally went into the underworld. Like he literally went to the top of the mountain and then down to the underworld, and then like kind of came out like this froggy kind of stuttering golem creature, you know, and like climbed back up the mountain.
That's true. And it's, I think part of what's so striking is that it's going so quickly. The iterations are turning so fast that, you know, and it's natural for people to sort of have, they have arcs, and then they, you know, sort of level out. They might have another arc. And that's what made like Trump's reelection after 4 years not in office partly so dramatic, is that we had an arc, and then we had a different arc, and Trump 2.0 is very different from Trump 1.0. And he had a pause in between, which is super important because, again, you do learn more from your failures than you learn from your successes. You always do, because success is fun and easy and it feels good, but failures are hard, and they're the things that really shape you.
That's part of the reason why it's really disappointing when somebody I admire won't accept defeat, because you're like, if you don't accept defeat, you're not going to really rise again. You're just going to keep floundering. Yeah,
depending on what you mean by accept defeat, because they're just like with so many things, there's sort of two aspects of that. Because does accept defeat mean, okay, I concede, or does accept defeat mean I need to learn to fight a different way? Mm-hmm. So,
well, I'm too quick to accept defeat myself. So,
yeah. I think we sort of have this. We are things. We are certain kinds of people, and we deal with these things and the way we deal with them. We really do.
Yeah. Can I ask a theological question?
Sure.
Why? I guess you're a Calvinist because that's your stock, right? So it's just part of your ethnicity. It's like baked in there. It's like asking a Jew why they're a Jew. Like they're either a Jew or not a Jew, but they're still a Jew kind of thing. And so if I asked you why Calvinism, it's not something that you necessarily elected in, but you've found your home there, and you haven't, doesn't seem like you went through a dramatic like prodigal period. I'm sure like everybody has like miniature prodigal periods, but how has Calvinism shaped your, what is the role of the theological and doctrinal aspect of your faith in your practice, in how you listen to people, how you judge people? You do judge people, you evaluate people. I'm not saying you're never evaluating people, but you do it in such a way that you do it in such a refreshing way, because I find myself judging people in a way, and I listen to you talk about another person or that person. I'm like, there's a way to see a person without denouncing them or just allowing them to be them. I'm wondering if that's purely a pastoral thing, or if there's something about this Calvinist way of thinking that allows you to accept people for what they are.
Let me first say that in many ways, a lot of these theological distinctions between Christians today, they continue to be meaningful, but I don't think they function in the ways we think they function. And I think you said it well. I've been formed by a tradition that is Dutch Calvinism. But to what degree I am now a member. I now have a YouTube membership to Sam Harris's membership.
Yeah, you were talking
group.
about that yesterday. Yeah.
And which I thought was just hilarious because I had to listen to this conversation between Jordan Peterson and Tom Holland. I'm sorry, between Sam Harris and Tom Holland. I really wanted to listen to that
Holland
conversation.
Tom Holland is one of your faves.
Yeah, he is. I really like Tom. So there's a way in which we are formed by our distinctive tribes, but that's sort of, again, the vertical, but then the horizontal is so strong where right now we're also, everything is just such a mix of everything else right now. And so to tease out what Calvinism is and how it plays, Calvinism, so John Calvin was basically a second generation reformer. And
second, 2 generations after Luther, is that what
he was the generation after Luther.
Okay.
Yeah, Luther and Zwingli, the Radical Reformation, the Anabaptists. You have all that sort of the first very early Reformation. Calvin comes later, writes in the
he has a huge impact.
Right, but and
second
this is
to Luther maybe in Protestantism. Would you say?
I'd say, well, there are more. I'd say more than Luther. So what Calvin does is the reason we know John Calvin is because he's a French refugee in Switzerland, and Switzerland has all these little sort of city-state things. They're not really city-states, but it's a very interesting place where there's a lot of openness, a lot of tolerance, a lot of diversity.
A lot of different languages, yeah.
Yep. It's sort of like the Netherlands, too. It's this boundary water. And Calvin winds up writing his Institutes. And his Institutes become this enormous... Luther was a publishing superstar. I mean, again, you didn't have royalties and all those kinds of things. Luther he was like me in that he just had to write his things. He's stuck in this Wartburg castle. He's just writing away, he's so angry, and he's just spinning out things. And of course, the publishers are taking these texts and they're not paying Luther anything for them. They're just publishing, and they're getting rich publishing Luther's stuff. Huh. Well, Calvin comes along, and he's heard all of these different distinctive first-generation reformers. And he, trained as a lawyer, he sort of synthesizes it all and puts it in kind of a framework that he sort of broadens it, and a lot more people can come into it, and it becomes a big bestseller. So there's touches of Calvin in most Protestantisms around.
Because he was a synthesizer.
He was a synthesizer.
So it all kind of bottlenecks through him and then goes back out.
And he's known sort of for double predestination, but that tends to get emphasized a century later. And so the church history is this massive thing. So all that to say, I think when I think about how Calvinism has affected me in a way that I'm conscious of, it does have to do with this reputation for the sovereignty of God. That part of the reason I can talk to someone and I don't feel the need to be anxious about winning, to be anxious about convincing, to sort of own them or dunk on them in sort of a YouTube style, is because by virtue of my dogmatic tradition, I can't do that. I can't make someone a Christian. Only God by his Holy Spirit can make Christians. Now, that doesn't mean God can't use me and have me be part of the process, but I am relieved of the obligation. When I first started doing this, I'd get emails from people when I would talk to someone. I'd get emails from other people, and they'd say things like, "You had John Verviki on your channel, didn't you?" I said, "Yes." Well, you missed your opportunity because what if he dies tomorrow? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
boy, that's a lot to put on my conversation,
Yeah,
especially
right.
with a guy
Yeah.
as complex as John Verveke.
Yeah. Yeah.
John Verveke is in God's hands. John
Yeah.
Verveke is not in my hands.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, my Calvinism gives me a freedom that says God is sovereign. I am not. And also then the thing that if anybody watches any of my rough drafts for Sunday or any of my sermons, I always structure the ending of my sermon with misery, deliverance, gratitude, which comes from the Heidelberg Catechism, which is a reformed confession that arises in Germany when the reformed movement is sort of getting hold in Germany. So Germany has Catholics and Lutherans and Anabaptists, who everybody hates, and then this new reformed community. And so the Heidelberg Catechism tries to, again, like Calvin, synthesize some of these voices in the Reformation. And I like the structure of the Heidelberg Catechism because it goes like this. It begins with misery. And it's sort of like to live is to suffer. To live in this world
Yeah.
means misery. And then deliverance. And deliverance basically means that Christ, out of no necessity of his own, God through Jesus Christ, his son is incarnate to rescue us. And so God makes the first move. I just had a men's group last night where we're just reading the Bible together, and we got all the way to the end of the book of Judges. The book of Judges is this horrible book where everything is just a disaster. And in the Christian Bible, right after the book of Judges is the book of Ruth,
Hmm.
where Naomi and Elimelech and her two sons go over to Moab because there's no bread in Bethlehem, the house of bread. And they go over to Moab and they're going to make a life until the two sons marry Moabite girls, and that's a very shady thing to do. But then Elimelech and the two sons die, and so Naomi is stuck in Moab with her two widowed daughters-in-law, and she hears, "Oh, there's bread in Bethlehem. I'm going back." And she says to her daughters-in-law, "Hey, you're young, find a husband, have a life. My life is spent. I am bitter because God has turned against me, you know." And Ruth, of course, has this great speech where you go, I go, your people will be my people, your God will be my God, and where you are buried, I will be buried. And of course, Ruth goes back, this Moabite girl in Bethlehem, and the whole story begins to turn around because of the virtue of one Moabite, young Moabite widow. And, you have that story. You have like the story of the book of Jonah, where there's nothing Jonah wants better than for God to scorch the Assyrians at Nineveh. And God says, "All right, go to Nineveh and preach 40 days and you'll be overturned." And of course, he doesn't want to go. Why doesn't Jonah want to deliver that message? That should be the message he wants to deliver. He wants to own them online. And and then what happens? But Nineveh's like, "We are sinners." And they start making sacrifices, and the king puts on sackcloth and ashes. And now Jonah's really pissed. And why is Jonah pissed? Jonah's pissed because he says, "God, you're too forgiving. The Ninevites deserve none of your grace. And I'm just going to go into the desert and I can die because," and that I think is part of the reason they killed Jesus, because what they wanted from Jesus was 40 days and Rome will be overturned and we'll make Israel great again. And
Yeah.
Jesus, I just preached on Zacchaeus. Jesus is willing to alienate all of Jericho, to call the worst sinner in town down from a tree, and to accept his hospitality and have Zacchaeus give a big repentant speech. And so for me, that says that there is no dungeon so dark that God is unwilling to go down and bring a light. And so and how God does that, that's God's business. I'm certainly
Yeah.
happy when he gives me the privilege of having a hand in it,
Yeah.
but I can't save anybody. So why don't I just have an honest conversation and let them know what I really think? And as a pastor, and I think you probably have a sense of this, sometimes you hunger for that because as a
Mm.
minister, you do have a job. You have to uphold the party line. You have to uphold your confessions and your church and your tradition. And you have to speak in a way that, keeps the family together. But there are times when there's an inconvenient truth that sometimes you just have to live with it and be
Mm.
quiet about it. But
Hmm.
YouTube affords me a space where I can let people know what I actually think. And some people find that refreshing. And some
Yeah.
people get annoyed by it.
Yeah. I had John Verviki on not too long ago. A few months ago, and I've spoken to him over the course of the last 7 years, like infrequently. So it was probably our fourth conversation or something like that. So we had developed a rapport, we had developed a shared language, and I had developed kind of an understanding of him through time. And towards the end of the conversation, I said, there's something different about you. There's a lightness to you. Why is that? And he said, I'm going to paraphrase. You can watch it. It's towards the end of the interview. He's like, well, I was out on this retreat with Jordan and Jonathan and Paul. I don't know if he brought up that they were water skiing or you guys are out on boats or something. And
No, that wasn't with me. That was Jordan's biblical seminar.
okay, so that was not with you, but with
No.
Jordan. And he said something about he's like, I never thought Jesus was important. And now I do. And I don't know, but I don't want to say anything about it because I like John. He's very imperious. Like he's not gonna commit to anything. Like he'll talk about psychedelics and meditation forever, but he won't talk about God. He just won't do that, but he had to do it and you could see it. And he had to he had to confess. He had to confess to having touched some sort of positive aspect
Yeah.
of the divine rather than
Yeah.
that what you said, misery, deliverance, and then what was the third?
Misery, deliverance, gratitude. So once we
Gratitude, okay.
discover the reason Christians do good things, it should be motivated by gratitude, by saying thank you to God, not out of fear, not out of trying to earn. And so that reformational concept that the Christian obedience flows out of gratitude more than anything else. Sometimes we just buckle up and do our duty, and sometimes we're afraid, but it should flow out of gratitude. Which, when I think about my children, no longer fear me. My children no longer fear me because they have jobs and lives and all of those things. But if they honor me or obey me, they do so out of love and gratitude, not out of fear or sucking up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the kind of relationship God wants with us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's directly tied to my theological heritage.
Yeah, I was speaking with man. I'm so bad with names. I just published it too. He wrote a book called Joe Rigney.
Oh, yeah.
Wrote a book called The Sin of Empathy. We talked about empathy, and he defined it in a specific way. And he titled it that, knowing that it would cause a stir, because that's what a good pastor does, with their sermon or whatever. Like what? Every once in a while, my dad would say a cuss word in the middle of a sermon, just to kind
Wake
of
them up a little bit.
Yeah, kind of show the thing. And from that point of view, the sin of empathy, and trying to figure out what a Christian is supposed to do, and trying to figure out the long houseification of Christianity, and what is a chivalric, conquering, manly Christianity about, and trying to find where's the strength, but also the temperance in that strength. Because it's necessary in order for young men to be drawn back into the church. There needs to be a return of the hero. And I think that, if we lean too hard on critiquing the feminization or the effeminate aspects, like empathy would be like the toxic feminine, you're like, well, we still have to invite and find where the woman belongs in this conservative or right-wing movement. That's why I like to ask all these right-wing guys, well, what's your message to women? Because they're not going to give up their rights and their property for you, even if they are miserable with a cat and SSRIs. They're not going to do that, man, and that, there has to be a container for empathy or sympathy or that feminine ability to be really sensitive and really concerned with the outgroup and really, kind of, even if it's twisted, kind of infantilizing everybody in order to establish a loving relationship with them when taken to an extreme. And I think that anchoring it not anchoring it to the positive, anchoring manliness, manhood, chivalry to gratitude. And even beyond duty and honor, it's to gratitude. I think gratitude is a really important, pivotal aspect to that. To saving the West, we can talk a little bit about Ark if you want to. My takeaway from Ark is that, okay, you want to save the West, and what's the difference between you and the West who wants to save the world? It's just one hemisphere. Like, there's no difference. Like, how are you gonna reach out? How are you gonna particularize?
Yeah.
How are you going to bear that? And the worry, the extreme anxiety from the classical liberals about the dissident right and their indifference or ambivalence towards other races than themselves, like this growing resentment towards other races that is fomenting in the white males. Can just easily be ambivalence if you don't lean into it too hard. But the classical liberals wanted, like, oh no, we can't go back to racism. And like, no, maybe there's a way through it, but they gave up everything to be colorblind. And what did that get them? And so what is the relationship between Britain and the British young men? Britain hates the young British man. Obviously, they hate the young British girls who are getting. I mean, we can talk about like what's happening. I'm kind of bringing up too much. I lost the plot, but I like the gratitude as an anchor. I like gratitude as an anchor.
Well, it is, and there's an interesting relationship between gratitude and happiness. And Jordan Peterson is right in that you don't pursue happiness. If you pursue happiness, you probably won't catch it. Happiness is something that comes around other good things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for Peterson, you pursue meaning, and then you will discover happiness will come.
Meaning. Yeah.
And gratitude, of course, is also a very interesting thing. You can't really pursue it directly, but it is very perspectival. And in terms of John Verviki's four P's, the propositional, procedural, participatory, perspectival, gratitude is very perspectival. And you look at, so when, I worked with these Haitians, and people would go down to the Dominican Republic and they'd be like, oh, these poor people are so happy. And it's like, yeah, it's more complex than that. But if I have this one story that I tell sometime that I got from a book from John Ortberg. He didn't write the story either, but it's a story about a young pastor who visits a nursing home, and there's a woman named Mabel who is in a crappy wing of it. And it's, as a pastor, you wind up in really crappy nursing homes sometimes. And,
Yeah.
just the smell of urine, it's overcrowded.
Yeah.
And so this young pastor, young seminarian, he's, trying to get his chops in terms of ministry, and he's bringing flowers for Mother's Day to a nursing home. And he finds this woman, and her face is half eaten by cancer. And nobody's around her. And he tries to give her a flower, and she says, well, I can't really smell anymore, and I don't really see very well, but you can give it to someone else. And then he starts talking to her, and he discovers that this woman's just overwhelmed with gratitude. And she spends all day, every day in this crappy nursing home. And she is the happiest person he's ever met. And he's like, what is going on? This woman should be bitter and miserable. And she's happy. And she just says to him, well, Jesus has been very, very good to me. And he looks at her like, what about this is good? And then he begins to understand that gratitude is deeply perspectival. And we have a degree of agency over our perspectives. And, one should probably express that agency, because the truth is that if you are a generous, grateful person who has ability to relate to other people, there's probably no end of people who would like to be your friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, like Jesus says, the good get more, and even those who don't have what they little have gets taken away from them. And so
Yeah. 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 I fear resentment. I just fear it. Like, there could be probably very few things that would damage your eternal life, or your connection to the eternal than that.
yeah,
Than even more than ingratitude. Like, the lack of gratitude is one thing. That's just kind
yeah,
of selfish and shallow. That just makes you shallow. But like resentment, like that is the cancer that will
yeah,
corrode you and turn you into a cancer.
yeah,
Like, make you identify with that.
yeah. And we've prescribed that to generations now in
How
order to
so?
save the world. Well, resent the group that you imagine is ruining the world.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Use that resentment to fuel motivation to go
yeah.
out and vote or be an activist or
Be a
do
change
whatever you
agent.
imagine. So
Yeah.
we've just been feeding resentment as a culture, and it's like that goes bad. It goes very.
Yeah.
I mean, look at. I've been listening to the rest is history. Some of the stuff leading up to the Second World War. Versailles and in Germany, you just would feed resentment, and so the thing about anger is, when you stoke anger in people, anger just gives us a sense of self-righteousness that I am right. And if I feel this self-righteousness, I'm just one step away from doing justice. I'm going to do justice against my enemies. Tom
Hmm.
Holland read this speech that Hitler gave before the annexation of Czechoslovakia, and it's not surprising that Bogosian and Lindsay could doctor Mein Kampf to create a publishable screed, because when you listen to Hitler, he's all about justice. The
Hmm.
Germans have not had justice. And so we now have to ensure justice for the oppressed German people at the hands of the Czechs,
Yeah.
and just poor, 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 poor.
Yeah. 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 So what does 2025 look like? What's coming up for you? Do you write? Are you burdened by that particular curse of needing to publish or desiring to
I wrote a
publish?
lot more before YouTube came along,
Yeah,
and
me too.
YouTube sort of satisfied what I
Yeah.
was doing writing. At some point, I would like to write, because writing is different.
Hmm.
And what you have when you finish writing is, like, I just wrote this piece. There's the thing called CRC Voices, which is a little Christian Reformed listserv of all things. I mean, before there was social media, there was listservs. And so I write on there quite a bit. And it's, again, just like my videos, it's kind of a helpful way for me to discover language to try to get a handle on what I'm thinking and feeling inside my head.
Hmm.
2025, there's going to be a big conference with Verviki and Peugeot.
Midwestuary. Or no, this is
Yeah,
something different. Or is it? Yeah.
Midwestuary. So Verviki, Peugeot, Rod Dreher, and Elizabeth Oldfield in
Hmm.
Chicago,
And Kel Zeldin.
Chicagoland. What's that?
Kel Zeldin.
And Cale Zeldin. That's right. So I'm really looking forward to that. I don't know. I mean, 2024 was a lot of travel. I get 4 weeks a year to sort of
Ventura.
go around. I spent 2 weeks in Europe early this year, so
Yeah.
with Midwestuary, that'll be 3 of my weeks burned. So I won't have a lot of other time to travel. I, Living Stones, just the church that I serve, there's just a lot of questions about, how, like,
Hmm.
right now, the current crisis are weeds. The member of the church who's now 91 and his disabled son have sort of kept the weeds at bay, and they are no longer able to do that. And so,
Hmm.
can the church afford a landscaping contract without just me taking a pay cut to pay for it. You don't really want to run a church that way because then it's no longer a church, it's just a pastoral ministry. So
Hmm.
there's, I don't know what comes in
Hmm.
2025,
Wow.
but it'll be fine.
Yeah. Wow. They have to deal with the weeds.
Got
That's
to deal with the
great.
weeds. And
That's
the weeds,
refreshing.
sometimes it's the homeless. I mean, I'll take pictures and put them
Yeah.
on YouTube, and sometimes it's the weeds, and we had a break in, and so there's just a lot of nuts and bolts things. But we had 3 baptisms last Sunday, adult baptisms, and 2 professions of faith. So
Oh, wow.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So that was really awesome.
What's the trajectory of a Calvin minister? Like, do you guys retire or you just die at the pulpit?
We do retire, but then, like my father, he retired, but did he stop doing what he always did?
Yeah.
So you start receiving a pension, which means you can usually work at churches for less, and churches really like that. Now we'll have to see how that goes because again, my life is weird in that there's this
Yeah.
YouTube thing, and so
Yeah.
normally if YouTube hadn't happened, this church would be closed.
Oh, wow. Really?
Oh yeah, yeah, because many people generously have. I just put a little link to the church online giving site, livingstonecrc.com/give, and basically generous people that like what I'm doing on YouTube support the church, and so that's a big deal. So the
Interesting.
church is still here. I'm still here. How long that goes, I don't know.
Sacramento.
But the if the church had closed, so my wife works for the school district. She makes more money than I do. We get our benefits from her. Increasingly, it's her pension that we're counting. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
I've been my piece of the pie has just been shrinking. So it's like if the church went belly up, what would I do? Would I do YouTube more? Would this be more of a financial source for me?
Yeah. Would
How
you
would that
restructure it?
change things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I get letters from other churches. So Christian Reformed Church doesn't have bishops. So churches are sort of independent brokers.
Hmm.
And so if a church is looking for a pastor, they can write me an email and say, "Would you be willing to talk to us about maybe this position?" And usually I say, "No." If I would go to another church, well, first of all, kind of what's been happening is churches are just smaller and smaller and poorer, so they pay their pastors less and less.
Yeah.
And so, I make less than a local public school teacher in
Yeah.
Sacramento now.
Yeah.
And so, even if I wanted to take another church, could the whole family afford me to do that? So, there's a lot of interesting things, but I'm, a few years from retirement. We'll see what happens.
Hmm. Hmm. Paul is always going to call this, I think, internet pastoral. It's always relaxing to speak with you. I get to. There's certain people when I'm speaking to them, I feel like I'm the confessor. Or which one is the one that listens and which one is the one that speaks? I don't know. But sometimes I feel like there's something in me that's being worked through rather than me conducting something else. Like you're one of them, John Verviki in certain respects. Jordan Hall has had this, he brought the spirit to that conversation. And then always Jonathan Peugeot. Always when I show up to him, I always sense they just prayed. Like, you good Catholic, you praying and making yourself feel good for the rest of their day. What am I doing with my life? You could just feel it with them. He tends that part of himself very, very much. And people who do that always have a sense that there's a way where you hold the space and the other person holds the space. But if God or a connection to that thing you don't necessarily have to call God for anybody who wants to have an argument about that particular word, but there's a broader thing that happens. And then I go through a process of growing and stretching and getting a little bit cleaned. That there's a little anxiety right there. Like, what's that? Okay, you can let it go. There's the misery.
Yeah, yeah, we've all got it.
Yeah.
It comes to all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll send people to your channel. Is there anything else you want to plug?
My channel is an acquired taste. Estuary. Now, I noticed when you talked to Grizz, when you came, that was the Jordan Peterson meetup phase. That wasn't Estuary. Estuary is a different protocol, and the group conversation is very different than what you came down for.
That was a
But
while ago.
yeah, that was a while ago. So Estuary is a really nice way for a little group of people to have a conversation about what's most meaningful. And I call it church adjacent. We don't, promote or teach or do any of that at Estuary. And it's really fun that the conferences that we are doing sort of continues to grow out of that. So we do have sort of a stage element, because if you don't give that to people, they don't know why they would come if they don't have the celebrity on stage doing some things.
Yeah.
But usually a good part of the conference is also breaking up into a little group of probably mostly randos around a circle, and then people getting to the protocol just kind of helps people to open up a little bit and share themselves. And I think that's a lot of what the church needs. And we have a number of people who participate in that aren't necessarily Christians, but it's a good thing. So
And they're all over the place too, right?
Yeah, they're all over the place.
Popping
Europe,
up.
U.S., Australia, New Zealand, Canada. So Germany,
And
Netherlands.
there's a way to get connected with that, like a website.
estuaryhub.org.
Okay.
And yeah, there's a little training thing and a little network where you can find a group where you can learn how to do a group on Friday. On Friday mornings at 10 a.m. Pacific, lately I've been using that live stream time to bring 5 other people, usually sort of randomly gathered. And then we just do the estuary protocol and we just have a conversation. That's all we do. And again, it's not something that's going to make a YouTube
Waves.
channel really explode,
Yeah. Yeah. No.
but it's something I super enjoy. So
Yeah. No. It's I think it's mapping out another type of content that I think is hands-on, and so it just doesn't scale, and it's not supposed to scale.
no. Doesn't need to.
No. All right, I'm going to end the recording. Thank you very much, Paul VanderKlay.
Thank you, Benjamin. It's always good talking to you.
Reverend. Yeah, absolutely. There we go. Boom. Boom.